In just 7 minutes and 23 seconds, the most powerful Republican in America would be reduced to a broken man announcing his resignation. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice during the House floor debate that ended Mike Johnson's speakership. She didn't need to. Her methodical destruction of his legislative record, his religious hypocrisy, and his complete failure of leadership was so devastating that Johnson walked off the floor mid-session and never returned as speaker. By the next morning, his resignation letter was on every desk in Congress. What did Crockett say in those 7 minutes that made the House Speaker quit politics forever? At exactly 3:17 p.m. on March 12, 2025, the House chamber crackled with budget crisis tension. The government shutdown loomed in just 72 hours, and Speaker Mike Johnson had spent the morning blaming Democrats for his own party's inability to govern. Harsh television lights illuminated the mahogany chamber, where 435 representatives sat in their assigned seats, cameras capturing every moment of what most assumed would be another day of partisan gridlock. Jasmine Crockett walked onto the House floor like a trial attorney approaching her closing argument in the case of her career. Navy blazer pressed to courtroom perfection, thick folder of documents in hand, her small frame somehow commanding the attention of the entire chamber. Her expression was calm, controlled, absolutely lethal. She carried herself like someone who'd been preparing for this moment her entire political life. Mike Johnson sat in the speaker's chair like a man carved from Louisiana Baptist. Certainty and parliamentary power. American flag pin gleaming. Gavel positioned for maximum authority. He shuffled through notes with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a political confrontation. His practiced smile suggested he was ready for another day of Democratic attacks that would bounce harmlessly off his religious righteousness and procedural control. But today would shatter every assumption about power, faith, and political survival. 3 elements hung in the House chamber air like gathering storm clouds: the looming government shutdown that Johnson couldn't prevent, growing Republican rebellion against his leadership, and Crockett's reputation for surgical precision when she smelled political weakness. The debate began with Johnson's opening remarks about Democratic obstruction and the need for responsible governance. Standard shutdown theater. Republican members applauded on cue. Democratic members sat in seemingly resigned silence. Everything appeared to follow the usual script of partisan finger-pointing, until Crockett rose to speak. "Mr. Speaker," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics, "you've spent considerable time today discussing responsibility and governance. I'd like to examine your record on both." Johnson's smile widened slightly. He lived for these moments of Democratic criticism that allowed him to demonstrate his mastery of House rules and parliamentary procedure. "The gentle lady is recognized for 5 minutes," he said, though his tone suggested this would be a routine exchange. "Thank you, Mr. Speaker." "I'll need 7. The request was unusual, but not unprecedented. Johnson nodded his consent, unaware he'd just approved his own political execution. Crockett opened her folder, revealing not talking points, but a comprehensive breakdown of Johnson's 18-month speakership that would serve as an autopsy of failed leadership. "Mr. Speaker, since you assumed this position in October 2023, the House has passed exactly 4 major pieces of legislation. 4. In 18 months, she held up a single sheet of paper. For comparison, the previous Democratic House passed 47 major bills in the same time frame. Would you like me to read the list?" Johnson's smile began to flicker. "The gentle lady knows that I'm not finished, Mr. Speaker. During your tenure, you've brought the government to the brink of shutdown 6 separate times. 6, each crisis caused by your inability to manage your own caucus." The chamber had gone completely silent. Even Republican members stopped their usual side conversations. But perhaps most remarkably, Crockett continued, her voice taking on the rhythm of a prosecutorial summation, "You've managed to lose more floor votes than any speaker in modern history. 17 separate defeats on bills you personally supported." She turned to a new page. "Would you like me to detail each failure, or shall we move on to your record on the issues you claim to care about most?" Johnson gripped his gavel tighter. The gentle lady should stick to the matter at hand. Oh, but I am, Mr. Speaker. Because your failure to govern is the matter at hand. The devastating precision was surgical, relentless, and absolutely factual. You've spoken frequently about your Christian faith and family values. Let's examine how those principles translate into policy. She pulled out another document. During your speakership, you voted to cut funding for children's nutrition programs by $2.3 billion. You've opposed every bill to expand healthcare access for pregnant mothers. You've blocked legislation to provide childcare support for working families. Her voice took on the cadence of a Sunday morning lesson. I'm curious, Mr. Speaker, which gospel passage guides your decision to take food from hungry children? The question hung in the air like a blade. Johnson's face had gone white. That's completely out of line. Is it? You've made your faith central to your political identity. You've questioned other members' religious beliefs. You've claimed moral authority based on biblical principles. She flipped to another page, her preparation clearly extensive and devastating. But your voting record suggests a different set of values. Matthew 25:40 says, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Your policies do the opposite. The chamber was dead silent. Even the stenographer had stopped typing. Let's talk about your leadership style, she continued, her voice never rising, but somehow filling the entire chamber. In 18 months, you've lost the confidence of 47 Republican members. 47 of your own party have publicly criticized your leadership. She held up a thick stack of papers. These are direct quotes from Republican representatives questioning your competence. Would you like me to read them? Johnson's practiced composure was cracking visibly. This is highly inappropriate. What's inappropriate is claiming to lead when you can't count votes. What's inappropriate is shutting down the government because you can't manage your own caucus. What's inappropriate is using Jesus Christ as a political prop while ignoring everything he actually taught. The devastation was complete. But Crockett wasn't finished. Mr. Speaker, you've had 18 months to prove you can govern. Instead, you've proven the opposite. You can't pass bills. You can't prevent shutdowns. You can't unite your party. You can't even maintain the respect of your own members. She closed her folder and looked directly at Johnson. The question isn't whether Democrats support your leadership. The question is why Republicans still pretend to. 7 minutes and 23 seconds. That's how long it took from her first word to Johnson's complete humiliation. The chamber erupted in chaos. Republican members called for points of order that Johnson seemed unable to hear. Democratic members sat in stunned silence at the completeness of the destruction. Reporters frantically typed breaking news alerts about the most brutal takedown in congressional history. But Mike Johnson just sat frozen in the speaker's chair, staring at Jasmine Crockett like he'd just witnessed the end of his political world. Because he, without calling for order, without attempting to respond, without exercising any of the powers of his office, Johnson simply stood up and walked off the House floor. The session continued without him, managed by the Speaker pro tempore, while the most powerful Republican in America disappeared into his private office and didn't emerge for hours. Within minutes, the 7-minute takedown was trending on Twitter. The video clip went viral across all platforms, faster than any political content in history. Cable news networks interrupted regular programming to replay Crockett's systematic destruction of Johnson's record. CNN's Jake Tapper led with extraordinary scenes on the House floor as Speaker Johnson faces devastating critique of his leadership. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow tweeted, "This wasn't just political criticism. This was a complete autopsy of failed leadership performed in real time." Even Fox News couldn't defend Johnson. Their hosts went conspicuously silent about the speaker they'd praised for months. Several commentators began privately questioning whether he could survive as leader. The evening brought a cascade of Republican defections that made Johnson's position untenable. By 6 p.m., 12 Republican representatives had publicly called for new leadership elections. By 8 p.m., that number had grown to 23. By midnight, 41 Republicans had either called for Johnson's resignation or refused to express confidence in his leadership. The Freedom Caucus, Johnson's supposed base of support, issued a statement at 10 p.m. saying they were evaluating all options for future leadership. It was political death by 1,000 cuts, all triggered by 7 minutes of truth on the House floor. Most devastating was the response from evangelical leaders who had supported Johnson's rise to power. Several prominent pastors issued statements questioning whether his record reflected true Christian values. The Southern Baptist Convention, Johnson's own denomination, called for deep reflection on the relationship between faith and governance. But the final blow came from within Johnson's own staff. At 11:47 p.m., his chief of staff leaked to Politico that Johnson had spent hours after the floor session in prayer and reflection about his future service. In political speak, that meant he was done. The resignation letter arrived at 6:23 a.m. the next morning, delivered simultaneously to every House office and major news outlet. It was brief, gracious, and completely devastating in its implications. After much prayer and consultation with my family, Johnson wrote, "I have decided to step down as Speaker of the House, effective immediately. The challenges facing our nation require leadership that can unite rather than divide, govern rather than campaign, and serve rather than perform." The letter continued, "I am grateful for the opportunity to serve, and I pray that my successor will find greater success in bringing our conference together and delivering results for the American people." It was political suicide note wrapped in the language of Christian humility. Jasmine Crockett's response to the resignation was characteristically measured and devastating in its simplicity. Speaking to reporters outside the Capitol, she said, "Speaker Johnson was right about one thing. Leadership requires the ability to govern." Yesterday's discussion simply highlighted the gap between campaign promises and governing reality. When asked if she felt responsible for his resignation, her response became instant political legend. "I didn't end Mike Johnson's speakership. His record did. I just read it out loud." The clip of that response garnered 15 million views within 24 hours. The aftermath of Johnson's resignation threw the House into chaos that lasted for weeks. Republicans couldn't agree on a successor. 3 different candidates withdrew after failing to secure enough votes. The government shut down twice during the leadership vacuum, exactly the crisis Johnson had been unable to prevent. It took 47 days to elect a new speaker, during which time the House was essentially paralyzed. The chaos became a national embarrassment, validating every criticism Crockett had leveled during those 7 devastating minutes. When Republicans finally selected a new speaker, the choice was telling: a moderate from Ohio who immediately reached across the aisle and worked with Democrats to pass a bipartisan budget that prevented further shutdowns. The new speaker's first major speech included a direct reference to the Johnson debacle. Effective leadership requires the ability to find common ground, pass legislation, and put governing above politics. The American people deserve nothing less. 6 months later, Mike Johnson announced he would not seek re-election to Congress, citing a desire to return to private life and focus on family. Political observers noted that a man who'd once harbored presidential ambitions was now toxic to his own party. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, became a Democratic superstar overnight. Her systematic destruction of Johnson's record was studied in political science classes as a masterpiece of opposition research and floor management. Progressive organizations hailed her as the future of Democratic leadership, but perhaps the most significant impact was on the nature of political accountability itself. Crockett's 7-minute takedown demonstrated that facts still mattered, that records could still be examined, and that even the most powerful politicians weren't immune to truth-telling. During a quiet interview with The New Yorker 6 months later, Crockett reflected on the day that changed the speakership, and arguably the House itself. "People ask if I plan to end Mike Johnson's career that day," she said, sitting in her Capitol Hill office. "The truth is, I plan to hold him accountable for his record. His career ended because he couldn't defend what he'd actually done in office." She paused, looking at the framed copy of the Constitution on her wall. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in politics is simply tell the truth. Mike Johnson's problem wasn't that I attacked him. His problem was that everything I said was accurate, documented, and undeniable. The lasting impact of those 7 minutes continued to reshape congressional leadership. Future speakers implemented new accountability measures, recognizing that the Johnson model of partisan control, without governing competence, was no longer viable. More importantly, it established a new standard for political criticism. The Crockett Standard became shorthand for fact-based, comprehensive takedowns that left no room for deflection or denial. The moment also inspired a new generation of politicians who saw that preparation, facts, and moral clarity could still triumph over political theater and empty rhetoric. Political power doesn't always announce itself with gavels and procedural motions. Sometimes, it walks onto the House floor with a folder full of facts and 7 minutes of truth that changes everything. What happens when political failure meets factual accountability? What happens when a record of incompetence confronts someone willing to read it out loud? What happens when the most powerful person in Congress faces someone who simply won't be intimidated? The answer was written in 7 minutes that ended a speakership and reminded America that some people still believe in governing. If this story inspired you, don't just scroll, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Here, truth doesn't knock. It enters with evidence and leaves with resignations. What's the most devastating political takedown you've ever witnessed? Drop it below.